The Gulfstream G650 cut through the night sky at 37,000 feet, its cabin bathed in the soft amber glow of premium lighting. The flight from London to Dubai was scheduled to take just over 6 hours, and the luxurious interior of the private jet reflected the wealth of its passengers. Cream leather seats, polished wood paneling, and crystal glasses created an atmosphere of refined elegance that spoke of serious money and serious people. Tyson Fury sat in the forward section of the cabin, his massive frame somehow managing to look comfortable in the spacious leather seat. He had been invited on this flight by a mutual business acquaintance, a rare opportunity to network with some of the wealthiest individuals in the Middle East. The heavyweight champion wore a well-tailored navy suit that did little to disguise his imposing physical presence, but his demeanor was relaxed and approachable. Across the aisle and 2 rows back sat Rashid al-Hashimi, a man whose very posture seemed to announce his importance to the world. In his early 40s, Rashid possessed the kind of confident bearing that came from being born into unimaginable wealth. His father owned oil fields across 3 countries, and Rashid himself had expanded the family empire into technology and real estate. His tailored Italian suit probably cost more than most people earned in a month, and the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist could have bought a house in most cities. Beside Rashid sat his 5-year-old daughter, Aisha, a beautiful child with large dark eyes, and her father's strong features softened by youth and innocence. She wore a small pink dress with matching shoes and clutched a stuffed elephant that had clearly seen better days. Unlike her father, who surveyed the cabin with the critical eye of someone accustomed to judging everything and everyone around him, Aisha seemed fascinated by her surroundings, and particularly by the enormous man sitting near the front of the plane. Layla Thompson, the chief flight attendant, moved gracefully through the cabin offering refreshments and ensuring passenger comfort. She was a seasoned professional who had worked on private jets for over a decade, serving everyone from Hollywood celebrities to heads of state. Her trained eye had immediately recognized Tyson Fury when he boarded, and she found herself stealing glances at the famous boxer throughout the early part of the flight. Captain Reynolds, a former Royal Air Force pilot with 25 years of flying experience, had announced their cruising altitude and estimated arrival time 30 minutes earlier. The flight was proceeding smoothly, with clear skies and minimal turbulence expected for the remainder of the journey. It was Rashid who broke the peaceful atmosphere of the cabin. He had been drinking champagne steadily since takeoff, and the combination of alcohol and his natural arrogance had apparently reached a tipping point. Rising from his seat with the exaggerated care of someone who was slightly intoxicated, he turned his attention to the massive figure seated near the front of the plane. "Excuse me," Rashid called out, his voice carrying the kind of entitled tone that immediately drew everyone's attention. "You're that boxer, aren't you? The big one with the funny accent?" Tyson looked up from the business magazine he had been reading, his expression neutral but alert. He had dealt with his share of drunk hecklers over the years, but the confined space of an aircraft presented unique challenges. "That's right," he replied calmly. "Tyson Fury." Rashid's laugh was harsh and condescending. "Well, well, the heavyweight champion. Tell me, what exactly can a man like you do up here? We're not in some grimy boxing ring now, are we? This is the real world where real power matters." The cabin fell silent except for the steady hum of the engines. Layla paused in her duties, her eyes widening at the unexpected confrontation. Even little Aisha looked up from her coloring book, sensing that something significant was happening. Tyson set down his magazine carefully and turned to face Rashid fully. His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Real power, is it? And what would you know about that, sitting in your ivory tower spending daddy's money?" Rashid's face flushed red, whether from the alcohol or the unexpected pushback was unclear. "Daddy's money? I've built an empire worth billions. I command respect from world leaders and business titans. What have you done except hit people for entertainment? You're just a big man with a funny accent," Rashid continued, his voice growing louder and more belligerent. "What can you actually do up here in the real world? Fight the air?" The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Layla found herself holding her breath, while Captain Reynolds' voice crackled over the intercom, asking if everything was all right in the cabin. Tyson Fury, a man who had faced down the most dangerous fighters in the world, found himself dealing with a different kind of opponent altogether. But instead of rising to the bait, instead of letting his famous temper flare, Tyson simply closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, his gaze settled not on Rashid, but on the little girl sitting beside him. "Your daughter probably thinks I fight dragons on television," Tyson said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin despite its soft tone. "And you know what? Maybe I do. Rashid opened his mouth to deliver another cutting remark, but something in Tyson's manner stopped him. The boxer's attention had shifted entirely to Aisha, and there was something in his expression that suggested the real confrontation was yet to come. Little did anyone in that cabin know that the next few minutes would transform what had begun as a moment of ugly confrontation into something far more profound and meaningful than any of them could have imagined. Aisha al-Hashimi had been quietly observing the exchange between her father and the enormous man at the front of the plane, with the wide-eyed fascination that only a 5-year-old could possess. While the adults around her tensed with the growing conflict, she saw something different in Tyson Fury's face. Where her father saw a target for his contempt, Aisha saw kindness in the boxer's eyes, a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his massive physical presence. Her small fingers absently stroked her stuffed elephant as she watched, her child's intuition sensing undercurrents that the adults around her were missing entirely. Rashid, emboldened by what he perceived as Tyson's passive response, prepared to launch another verbal assault. The champagne had loosened his tongue and clouded his judgment, making him feel invincible in the rarefied atmosphere of his private jet. He was a man accustomed to having the last word in every conversation, to dominating every room he entered through sheer force of wealth and perceived superiority. The altitude and alcohol had combined to create a dangerous cocktail of arrogance and recklessness that was about to reveal itself in its full ugliness. "Dragons on television," Rashid scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain as he swayed slightly in the aisle. "How pathetic. You make your living as a circus performer, entertaining the masses while real men like me shape the world. You're nothing more than a dancing bear in expensive shorts, performing tricks for the amusement of people who will never achieve anything meaningful themselves." The words hung in the cabin air like poison, their toxicity made worse by the confined space and the presence of his innocent daughter. Rashid's voice had grown louder with each syllable, his contempt becoming more obvious and more cruel as his inhibitions dissolved completely. Layla Thompson stepped forward, her professional training kicking in as she recognized the potential for the situation to escalate dangerously. She had dealt with intoxicated passengers before, but never in such close quarters, and never with this level of personal animosity involved. "Gentlemen, perhaps we could all settle down and enjoy the remainder of our flight," she said diplomatically, though her eyes showed clear disapproval of Rashid's behavior. Her voice carried the practiced calm of someone who had learned to diffuse tensions at 30,000 feet, but even she could feel the unusual intensity of this particular confrontation. But Tyson remained remarkably calm, his attention still focused on little Aisha rather than her increasingly belligerent father. There was something about the child's innocent gaze that reminded him of his own children, of the responsibility that came with being looked up to by young minds that saw the world in terms of heroes and villains. He had learned over the years that his words and actions carried weight far beyond their immediate impact, that children especially watched and remembered how adults chose to handle conflict and adversity. "Tell me, sweetheart," Tyson said gently, addressing Aisha directly while completely ignoring her father's continued insults. "What do you think dragons look like?" Aisha's face lit up with excitement at being included in the adult conversation, her previous concern melting away as she found herself the center of positive attention. "They're big and scary," she said in careful English, her small voice carrying a slight accent that made her words even more endearing. "But some dragons are good dragons. They protect people from bad things." The innocent wisdom in her words was not lost on the adults listening, each of them recognizing the metaphorical weight of what she had just said. In her child's mind, she was already categorizing the enormous boxer as one of the good dragons, a protector rather than a threat. Rashid's expression darkened as he realized his daughter was engaging with the man he had been trying to humiliate. The alcohol had made him possessive and irrational, and seeing Aisha respond warmly to Tyson felt like a personal betrayal. "Aisha, sit down and color your pictures. This doesn't concern you," he commanded, his voice taking on the sharp edge of parental authority mixed with embarrassment. But the little girl had apparently inherited some of her father's stubborn streak, though in her case, it manifested as courage rather than arrogance. Instead of returning to her seat, she took a step closer to Tyson, still clutching her worn stuffed elephant. The toy had clearly been with her for years, its fabric faded and one ear slightly askew from countless hugs and adventures. It was then that she noticed something that had escaped everyone else's attention in the heated moment. On the floor beside Tyson's seat lay a silk pocket square that had apparently fallen from his jacket during the earlier confrontation. It was deep blue with subtle silver threading, clearly expensive but understated in its elegance. The fabric caught the cabin lights and seemed to shimmer slightly as it lay forgotten on the pristine carpet. Without hesitation, Aisha bent down and picked it up, examining it with the intense curiosity that children brought to new discoveries. "You dropped this," she said, holding the silk square out to Tyson with both hands, as if presenting him with a precious gift. Her small fingers handled the delicate fabric with surprising care, recognizing instinctively that it was something valuable and important. Tyson looked down at the pocket square, then at the little girl's earnest face, and something shifted in the atmosphere of the cabin. The gesture was so simple, so pure in its intention, that it seemed to cut through all the adult complications and pretenses that had been building around them. He reached out and gently took the silk from her small hands, but instead of returning it to his pocket, he held it for a moment, as if considering something important. "Thank you, Princess," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to encompass the entire cabin. "But you know what? I think this might look better on you." With infinite gentleness, Tyson draped the silk square around Aisha's neck like a small cape, adjusting it carefully so it hung properly on her tiny frame. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy as he made sure the makeshift cape was secure but not too tight. The little girl looked down at herself with wonder, then back up at Tyson with a smile that could have powered the aircraft's engines. "You smell like a hero," Aisha said suddenly, her child's honesty cutting through the adult pretenses and posturing that had dominated the conversation. "Like my daddy's cologne, but warmer, like sunshine and strength mixed together." The words hung in the air with devastating simplicity. Rashid, who had been preparing another cutting remark, found himself suddenly speechless. The innocent observation from his daughter had somehow stripped away all his bluster and bravado, leaving him exposed in a way that no business rival or competitor had ever managed to achieve. Her simple, honest assessment had revealed the fundamental difference between artificial power and genuine strength. Tyson knelt down so that he was at eye level with Aisha, his massive frame folding with surprising grace. The movement brought him down to her world, literally and figuratively, acknowledging her importance in this moment. "And you smell like sunshine and vanilla ice cream," he said with genuine warmth. "That's much better than hero smell, trust me." Layla found herself blinking back tears as she watched the gentle giant interact with the little girl. She had seen Tyson fight on television, had witnessed the controlled fury he could unleash in the ring, but this display of tenderness with a child revealed a completely different side of his character. The contrast between his public persona and this moment of quiet gentleness was almost overwhelming in its beauty. Captain Reynolds's voice crackled over the intercom again, but this time it was to announce that they were beginning their initial descent into Dubai. The flight that had seemed destined for confrontation and ugliness was nearing its end, but the real transformation was only just beginning. The professional calm in the pilot's voice provided a stark contrast to the emotional intensity that had been building in the cabin. Rashid remained standing in the aisle, his face cycling through a range of emotions as he watched his daughter interact with the man he had been insulting just minutes earlier. Shame, confusion, and something approaching awe warred for dominance in his expression. The contrast between his own behavior and Tyson's gentle response to Aisha was becoming impossible to ignore, and for the first time in many years, the billionaire found himself genuinely ashamed of his actions. "Daddy," Aisha said, turning to look at her father while still wearing Tyson's pocket square like a cape, "why were you being mean to the Dragon Man? He's nice." The question, delivered with the devastating honesty that only children possessed, hit Rashid like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter, then at Tyson, who was still kneeling patiently beside the little girl, and for the first time in the conversation, he found himself without words. The cabin fell silent, except for the changing pitch of the engines as the aircraft began its descent, and in that silence, something fundamental shifted between the three adults and one child, who would soon part ways but would never forget this moment above the clouds. The descent into Dubai had begun, and the cabin lights automatically dimmed to prepare passengers for landing. Through the small windows, the first glimmers of the city's lights were becoming visible far below, a sprawling constellation of gold and white against the darkness of the desert. The Gulfstream's engines had changed pitch, their steady hum taking on the different quality that signaled the end of a journey. Rashid al-Hashimi stood frozen in the aisle, his daughter's innocent question echoing in his mind like an accusation. Why had he been mean to the Dragon Man? The simple honesty of a 5-year-old had cut through years of carefully constructed arrogance and entitlement, leaving him face to face with a version of himself that he barely recognized and certainly didn't like. Tyson remained kneeling beside Aisha, the silk pocket square still draped around her shoulders like a miniature superhero cape. The image they created together, the massive heavyweight champion and the tiny girl, seemed to capture something essential about strength and gentleness that transcended the superficial markers of wealth and status that had dominated the earlier conversation. "Your daddy wasn't being mean, Princess," Tyson said gently, though his eyes briefly met Rashid's over Aisha's head. "Sometimes grown-ups say things when they're tired or worried about something. It doesn't make it right, but it makes them human." The words hung in the air between them, and Rashid felt the sting of recognition. How long had it been since someone had offered him such grace? In his world of corporate boardrooms and power plays, mercy was seen as weakness, forgiveness as vulnerability. Yet here was this giant of a man offering understanding instead of retaliation, compassion instead of conquest. Layla Thompson watched from her position near the galley, her professional composure barely masking her emotional response to the scene unfolding before her. In her years of serving wealthy and powerful passengers, she had witnessed displays of arrogance, entitlement, and casual cruelty that had sometimes made her question her faith in human nature. But she had also seen moments of unexpected grace and redemption, and she recognized that she was witnessing one of those moments now. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the crystal glasses she had been collecting, the weight of the moment making even routine tasks feel significant. Aisha looked up at Tyson with the serious expression that children sometimes wore when processing complex adult emotions. Her small face was illuminated by the soft cabin lighting, making her dark eyes appear even larger and more thoughtful. "Are you worried about something?" she asked, her childish intuition cutting straight to the heart of adult complexities. The question caught Tyson off guard. He had been focused on diffusing the tension and protecting the child from her father's bad behavior. But her innocent inquiry touched on something deeper. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure wavered, revealing glimpses of the vulnerability that lurked beneath his public persona. "Sometimes I worry about being good enough," he admitted with surprising honesty, "about living up to what people expect from me, about whether the man I am in private matches the hero people want me to be." "But you're already good," Aisha said, with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. "You gave me your pretty scarf, you smell like heroes, and you have kind eyes." She paused, tilting her head as she studied his face with the intense concentration that children brought to important discoveries. "My grandmother had kind eyes too. She used to tell me that people with kind eyes can see into hearts." Rashid felt something break inside his chest as he listened to his daughter's words. When had he last been described as having kind eyes? When had he last done something purely good, without expectation of return or calculation of advantage? The wealth and power that had always defined him suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless in the face of his 5-year-old daughter's simple moral clarity. He thought of his own father, a man who had built an empire through ruthless determination and unwavering focus on profit margins. Had he inherited more than just money and business acumen? Had he also inherited a coldness that his daughter could somehow see? Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom one final time, his professional calm a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence in the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're on final approach to Dubai International Airport. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 10 minutes. The announcement seemed to break the spell that had settled over the small group. Reality was reasserting itself, reminding them that this extraordinary moment would soon end, that they would return to their separate lives and vastly different worlds. Tyson started to rise from his kneeling position, but Aisha reached out and touched his arm with the urgent concern of someone who feared losing something precious. "Wait," she said urgently. She carefully removed the silk pocket square from around her neck and held it out to him with both hands, as if presenting a sacred offering. "This is yours. You need it for being a hero." But Tyson gently pushed her hands back, his massive fingers incredibly gentle as they guided her small ones. "Heroes don't need fancy scarves, sweetheart. They just need good hearts. And I think you have a much better heart than mine." He paused, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a different pocket square, this one a simple white cotton that had obviously seen more use than the silk one. "Here, take this one instead. It's not as pretty, but it has something more important." "What?" Aisha asked, fascinated by this mysterious quality that couldn't be seen. "It has the smell of strength," Tyson said solemnly, his voice taking on the weight of someone imparting important wisdom. "Real strength. The kind that comes from being kind to people, even when they're not kind to you. The kind that helps you forgive others, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, helps you forgive yourself. As Aisha carefully tucked the cotton square into her small purse, treating it like the treasure it had suddenly become, Rashid finally found his voice. It came out rougher than he intended, thick with emotions he hadn't experienced in years and barely knew how to express. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, each word seeming to cost him something. "What I said earlier was inexcusable. I was wrong, completely and utterly wrong." Tyson stood up slowly, his full height making the cabin feel suddenly smaller. When he spoke, his voice carried no triumph or vindication, only a quiet dignity that made his words more powerful than any angry response could have been. "We all have bad moments," he said simply. "What matters is what we do after them." Rashid looked at his daughter, who was examining her new treasure with intense concentration, then back at Tyson. The contrast between the two interactions was stark and humbling. "She's right, you know, about the kind eyes. I haven't seen myself clearly in a very long time. I've been so focused on building walls and projecting strength that I forgot what real strength actually looks like." The aircraft touched down with barely a bump, the skilled Captain Reynolds earning his considerable salary, with a landing so smooth it was almost imperceptible. As the engines wound down and the cabin lights returned to full brightness, the four people in that luxurious space found themselves changed by their encounter, in ways that would last far longer than the flight itself. Layla began her post-landing procedures, but her movements were quieter than usual, as if she too recognized the significance of what had transpired. She had served on thousands of flights, but she knew she would remember this particular journey for the rest of her career. The routine tasks of collecting glasses and preparing the cabin for disembarkation felt almost sacred after what she had witnessed. As the aircraft taxied toward the private terminal, Tyson gathered his belongings with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout the confrontation. Rashid helped Aisha with her coloring books and stuffed elephant, his movements gentler and more attentive than they had been at the beginning of the flight. The transformation in his demeanor was subtle but unmistakable, as if some fundamental tension had been released. When the cabin door finally opened and the Dubai heat rushed in to meet them, carrying with it the sense of desert sand and distant spices, Tyson was the first to prepare to disembark. But before he could step toward the exit, Rashid's voice stopped him. "Mr. Fury," the billionaire said, his tone completely different from the arrogant swagger he had displayed earlier. "Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." Tyson paused at the threshold of the aircraft and looked back one final time. His eyes moved from Rashid to little Aisha, who was clutching both her elephant and her new cotton pocket square, then to Layla, who was watching with undisguised admiration. "Power isn't shown by a punch," he said quietly, his words carrying clearly through the cabin. "It's shown by what you give when no one's watching." And with that, the heavyweight champion of the world stepped out into the Dubai night, leaving behind three people whose lives had been quietly but permanently altered by 30 minutes of unexpected grace at 37,000 feet.